Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one is going to be for Sword Art Online Volume 11, which is called Alicization Turning. This is the third volume in the Alicization arc, and it came out a couple of weeks ago in English. A little late getting it here, but I will have my usual review / discussion here as ever. So quickly, let's get the kind of visuals of this out of the way. So there's the cover here, featuring Kirito, and then the pages of Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh, who are TS and Ronnie. TS is Yu-Gi-Oh's page, and then Ronnie is Kirito's page. Ultimately, they don't play as big of a role as you'd maybe think, but I think that's just the Alicization arc in general. It's getting through a lot of information very quickly, and, you know, not every character is going to be a main character. They're obviously involved in the plot of this book, but it's not like you really get to know them like a ton kind of type thing. But anyway, and then in terms of the main visuals here, we get the clean version of the page, the kind of introduction page for everyone as well. We obviously met these characters at the end of last volume. We have some of the more action-based stuff towards the end of Yu-Gi-Oh with his injury, and then the two girls as well. And then we have this big reveal page here with Alice, finally meeting her again, and Yu-Gi-Oh as well. And yeah, the reveal here is that Alice is now a Integrity Knight, which is pretty crazy because obviously she was taken by Integrity Knights, but now she is one. The map remains the exact same as last time out, because we don't really change location for the most part. Yeah, the back cover just has that nice chibi one of the two girls as well. And yeah, I suppose let's get into it then. I think with this one, it's fair to say probably 11 is probably the weakest of the three Alicization books so far. Not to say it's bad by any means, it's just I think the strength of Volume 9 was the introduction to all of this stuff and how kind of important it all felt. It's this brand new arc and it's taking a different approach. 10 obviously had the bonus of having that really information heavy section in the present day with the Kikuoka reveal, the details of what the underworld actually is, and the various ways you can interpret that, and, you know, just giving you an insight into, oh, so that's what is actually happening with Kirito. Here, obviously, the focus is primarily on stuff in the game. There's only one small chapter that focuses on the present day stuff with Asuna on the Ocean Turtle. Everything else is just you know, Kirito, Yu-Gi-Oh in the world, and just the progress of their mission. Now, there ultimately is, as it says here, a bit of a turning point here in that towards the end, there are some bigger reveals that come out, which I'll get into talking about, and of course the return of Alice into the story. But it is more so the reveal right at the end, which is a new thing, that kind of presents this arc as being maybe bigger and maybe taking a different approach than you'd maybe think. Because up to now, the arc has been split into, like, obviously two main things. And that is that Kirito in the game is basically in the game so that the Metacuboid kind of unit that he's in can heal his brain, basically, after the, you know, the poisoning, the attempted killing from Volume 9. So he's recovering while he's playing the game, and so that's just this thing that's happening in the present day. Asuna is basically now there, she's watching over him as he recovers, and in this book they reveal that it's only going to be like a day or two before they feel that Kirito's brain will have recovered enough to where he might regain consciousness, and and it overall seems quite positive about where things are going for Kirito. What happens, obviously, at the end of this is that they then reveal this kind of different angle on things of just like, oh wait, actually, because we're dealing with AIs here and not like effectively everyone except Kirito in the underworld is an AI based off of Fluxlight, and you know, in the effort to create, you know, an Alice, which is obviously the reveal from the last time out, ALICE. I can't remember the exact meaning of it, but it's like, you know, artificial. I think some French word. Just basically getting across the idea that an ALICE is a true artificial life form. And in this, they basically suggest at the end that the reason why things have kind of changed in the game is because of one specific character who is ultimately kind of being revealed to be like the main, you know, villain of the piece, Quinella, and she is this super power hungry character who is at this stage basically, you know, 370 years old, that she should have been, you know, dead at this stage, but she has basically become an administrator of the game and now has control over a lot of these things. And the reason that all this kind of weird stuff is happening in the game right now, and the reason why this system, which should be a kind of utopia given the way they set it up, that the people can't break any of the rules, the reason it's in this kind of weird feudal system where there are nobles and there's still problems is because of her and some of the stuff they establish. It makes you think that, like, okay, this is obviously immediately going to present an idea of like Kirito actually has this mission to tackle, but because of the timeline they set on things and that Kirito's going to wake up in like a day or two, that means that because of the time acceleration in the game, it means he has up to about 2 years to like deal with whatever thing he's tackling here. It's obviously a little bit kind of different than that, but if it is like a day, I think they basically said that like a year was like about 18 months or something like that. What way did they say? No, 18 hours is like the equivalent of like a year or something like that, or I can't remember exactly, but it's something along those lines. So effectively, it's like 2 years is, you know, in or around a day or two. So there still could be a lot of, you know, ground to cover within the main, you know, Alicization story within the game to actually approach, you know, defeating this character within the game. The thing I'm interested in after this is kind of, okay, are they now setting it up to where Quinella now has control and can affect things in the real world? That this simulation of AIs has gotten so out of control that Wrath have more or less lost control over what's exactly is happening here, and there could be some sort of a thing where Quinella locks down the game. No one can go in, no one can go out, and that's part of like the issue with what's going on here. Because as it is, it kind of feels like there's, once Kirito heals, is there any need for him to stay in the game? Obviously, we know him as a character. He cares about, you know, NPCs in games. He obviously cares about like Yui as like a kind of top-down AI. And here are these kind of bottom-up AIs, ALICEs basically, and you know, he cares about these characters, Yu-Gi-Oh, and he's really invested in the people in this world, even though as we get to his section of the story towards the end, he is very aware that all of these people who are surrounding him are just, you know, Fluxlights basically. They are just AIs, and he's the only actual human in this world. He's still going to care about what's happening to them and doesn't agree with, I suppose, some of the stuff like we got in the last kind of chat volume of just them kind of messing around with AIs and feeling that they can just like terminate them if they want to, if they feel they've gotten out of hand. That's just the type of character Kirito is. So there's definitely a sense that there's something more going on here, and I think because they didn't spend a whole lot of time on the ocean turtle here, the one moment on the ocean turtle is effectively just to say that, okay, Kirito, it's going to be like a day or two and the healing should be done and you might be able to speak to him or something like that. And then the only other thing is that they introduced these robots. As she's going to see Kirito, she comes across these robots that they've been making, with the idea being that, of course, this whole program is being run by the Japanese military, and they're trying to create AIs as effectively, you know, weapons of war. That they are these, you know, things they can put in machinery can operate them without any humans actually being put at risk. And so they're developing these robots that they can put some of the completed AIs from Project Alicization into, and Asuna has met them now. And we just kind of end that side of the story by like her kind of being a little bit on edge around some of the stuff that's happening here. She kind of gets a bad sense from some of the people in play here, which, again, linking into some of the stuff that is revealed at the end of this when Kirito talks to Cardinal, who's basically the kind of like personal embodiment of the Cardinal system within this game, the Underworld. What he learns from her, who she's the one he gets the whole Quinella backstory from, is that the reason that as I said, what should be a perfect society within this game, the reason that it has this feudal system of government basically, is because of the 4 Wrath members who were diving into the game to start it off, and that was revealed in the last book, that there were 4 team members of Wrath who basically acted as the like first 4 parents for the first group of artificial fluxlights. And basically they say that 3 of them had good ideals, and that's for the most part why no one will break any of the rules within the game, that it was just a built-in thing that no one would do these wrong things. And the reason why a lot of that's gone wrong, and as we see in this book, the kind of theme of the Kirito-Yujio kind of section of the book is kind of nobles abusing their power. The reason that's in play is because one of those team members didn't have like a good heart, is kind of the way the Cardinal explains it. That one of them didn't have very good intentions and kind of left their mark on like a quarter of the population of the game at that point in time. And over the years, as you know, more and more people grew, as they went out of the world, it remained a part of the world that there was this group of people who had these kind of ill intentions, felt like they deserved to have control over things, clearly suggesting that one of the members of the team was more power hungry than the rest, and that kind of has continued on to this day. The other thing we get in that side of the story is the Cardinal kind of talking about how it was a weakness of designing this kind of test, basically, which is what it is. It is a test bed for these AIs and having them interact together. One of the weaknesses that the designers made was keeping it in the game that the AIs could use the system commands, which is obviously to call up your window and how much life force you have left. Basically the game mechanics, that they shouldn't have left that in the game. And even if they did, one thing that they absolutely shouldn't have allowed anyone to ever access was a list of all of the system commands. And I think that's one of the world building things in this book that comes across quite clearly, in that they are really making it clear that those kind of spells that they do to do the magic are very much just kind of like computer code type things, like generate object dark at this point doing this, you know, generate fire effect in the shape of an arrow. And it goes as far down as to, obviously with Quinella, they're kind of establishing that she managed to find a way to affect her own life force, in that there's obviously some system command that allowed her to keep herself alive longer than others and have the impact that she's had on the world up to now, and developed obviously these like integrity knights and the system of the Axiom Church with a lot of these massive rules in place, and them being the ones who have access to all of the high level skills and so on. Which I found to be a pretty interesting thing, in that they very much set it up that like there's this kind of rogue AI that is kind of threatening the whole project, who, if the members back at Wrath on the Ocean Turtle aren't careful enough about, could, you know, be turned around on them. But again, I'm not really sure about what the exact direction that they're going in is, because I feel they ultimately will have a lot more stuff in game here, and it's not just going to be a case of, oh, Kirito's now back in the real world and we're dealing with something else. That the core of this arc in a way is based around what's happening in the game. And I think the idea is ultimately going to be that the only way for like Wrath to kind of get anything good out of all of this kind of disaster that seems to be almost about to happen with them losing control of the test will be that Kirito, who's already in there, will have to take down Quinella and, you know, bring the project back to the way it used to be. But yeah, let's get into actually talking about the main plot with Kirito, Yu-Gi-Oh, TS, and Ronnie. It's one of those ones where like it's a lot darker, the plot here for sure. In that like the last one was kind of, you know, it was serious in that like the fights that they were having were obviously to determine who the best students were, and it was serious. But this one is more like, okay, there's still that, but now there's just a lot of there's objectively, you know, bad people here, you know, people who really don't have good hearts, as they kind of tend to talk about here. Some of the other kind of elite disciples alongside Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh, the ones above them, are not very good people at all, and they basically use the whole idea of that there's these two characters, it's number 1 and 2 ranked, you know, swordsmen, and they are just these really awful people who use their higher rank of nobility to, you know, basically abuse the people around them, and that they really don't like Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh because they're not nobility at all, and then they use their rank of nobility especially against the lower ranks, which they kind of have control over. They establish this kind of separate form of law based around the nobility, where like if you're 4th ranked and above, you kind of have this sense of control over like the 5th and 6th ranks, which is what TS and Ronnie are. And so that becomes a big kind of plot point in terms of like, you know, in terms of what happens with this story, because it's effectively until, you know, Alice comes into play. The first section of this book is kind of from Yu-Gi-Oh's perspective, and I think it's really important that they did it from his perspective, given what they reveal later on, and I suppose how it links into the overall Alicization project, because it's from his perspective as he watches these other two students. What the names again is like Ruiz or something like that, and then Humbert, or a iOS, Rios and Humbert are the names of the number 1 and 2 ranked students, and you know, Yu-Gi-Oh is obviously having some issues with these two, but then the big plot point comes into play where Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh's pages come to them and tell them that basically the page of one of them, so I think it's Rios's page, he's basically been like abusing her, is kind of the idea here, that he's been having her perform these vulgar acts that, yes, you know, the page is kind of meant to be somewhat of a servant to the elite disciple, but not to that degree. And it's this weird kind of gray area where they know that what he's doing is wrong, but because everyone in this world is so obsessed with like the taboo index and the direct rules of the world, there's almost no room for like, oh, but like if this doesn't directly break one of those rules, what does it matter that we have these hard and set fast rules? What does like a moral decision about like, is that a good thing to do with someone that you kind of have some level of power over? Is that a good or a bad thing? And eventually what happens is that Yu-Gi-Oh, in trying to stop this and get like you know, the heads of the sword school basically involved, and you know, getting him and Kirito involved in all of this, it kind of ends up being this kind of trap where the two, obviously number 1 and 2 ranked students, are basically trying to, you know, lure both of them into a trap where they can get those two to break the rules by like, oh, you've accused us of something that we didn't actually do, and that would be Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh breaking the rules, and they'd kind of be able to get their power over anyone else in play, kind of using their kind of privilege as nobles to kind of get someone else in trouble, basically. And it all comes down to basically this moment of where the two girls actually go to confront the student who's been obviously abusing their friend, who's one of the other pages, and they end up kind of going missing, and it turns out that they were basically, you know, kidnapped there to lure Yu-Gi-Oh out so they could get Yu-Gi-Oh in trouble. And when he arrives there, it's effectively the scene where the number 1 and 2 ranked student are about to rape the two of them. That's effectively what is about to happen. And we get the setup again of like, Yu-Gi-Oh remembering what happened with Alice and how he wasn't able to help her. In that it wasn't just a case of like he was frightened and didn't know what to do and was just with fear like frozen. We now get the explanation that no, he was literally like forced frozen, that there was this kind of system error thing that came up for him and he wasn't allowed to move. He wasn't allowed to break the rule and go to help her, because obviously the rule she broke was kind of crossing a territory line, and he couldn't go to help her because he was, you know, stood still basically. And it's about to happen here as well, in that they've been like taunting him this entire, like the first half of the novel, they've been taunting him and asking him to basically, you know, break a rule. And here he realizes that to save them from being raped, he has to break this rule. And again, what happens is that it looks like the same thing has happened again. He gets frozen. We see very clearly that a system error comes up in his right eye. It says system error, then it gives a code, and he forces his way through it. He basically breaks through the system error, but in the process it kind of, you know, destroys his right eye. But he still manages to break through, and he cuts one of their arms off with his sword. And they then turn on him, and he's weakened obviously because his eye has just been kind of blown out. And they're about to kill him when Kirito arrives, because Kirito is off doing investigating elsewhere. And Kirito ends up taking out the other guy in a sword fight. It's the biggest fight in the book. It's Kirito against Raus. And he ends up in the fight, because it's in the confined area, he doesn't use Ainkrad's style, he uses Leanna's style from the last book, and uses her kind of two-handed style in some of her moves, and ends up getting the advantage over that guy, and cutting both of his hands off. So Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh have both badly injured the two of these guys for what they were about to do. And what happens then is that obviously Kirito is established to, of course, be different than Yu-Gi-Oh because he's not AI, so there's not the restriction on him that there is on Yu-Gi-Oh. So that's why there was no like eye blowing up system error thing for him. But what happens is that the person that Kirito chopped both of his hands off, he basically just dies, and it's this weird death where they basically say that the reason he died is not because he bled out or his life went to zero, it's that in trying to figure out what to do with his kind of injured hands, he had a choice to whether like to steal life from the other guy who got his arm chopped off, or like attack Yu-Gi-Oh. And in making that decision about like, should I break the rule or not, his Fluxlight just kind of like imploded on itself and kind of killed him. So the idea is that Yu-Gi-Oh managed to force his way through this system error, whereas Raus kind of got killed by it because it was a combination of suffering from bad injury, complete indecision, system error, and it just kind of crashed him completely. So technically, Kirito kills this guy, but it's more like everything that he was about to do ended up killing him. But the result of all of this is that Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh have to be kicked out because they both have broke one of the laws, and that is that you're not meant to attack or hurt other people. That is directly one of the taboo indexes. You're not meant to do that, and because they've effectively killed someone, they have to be banished more or less. And similar to what happened to Alice, an Integrity Knight comes to take them away, and when they see the Integrity Knight, it turns out that it's Alice. And this is the big reveal that happens here. It's Alice, she's an Integrity Knight, but she doesn't remember them at all. It's just like she has the same personality as like the Integrity Knight that took her away. There's very little talking, she's all about business, where like, I'm in charge here, you're gonna get punched if anything goes wrong, and she takes them away. They do establish that the pages basically ask her out of like honor to let her take their swords with them, so that's why the swords are still with them, even though they're like kind of prisoners far away. Yeah, that's the kind of like end of the first half of the book basically, and that's when you get the prelude, the interlude going into the ocean turtle with that one asana scene. So like just on that first section of the story, I think like I liked what it ultimately did because I felt like the second half of the book, which I'll get into, gave extra context to the first half in terms of like, this is a huge moment for Yu-Gi-Oh! Because this is the moment where Yu-Gi-Oh! Effectively goes from being a like test potential AI to being a true AI, like he becomes in that moment of breaking that seal an ALICE. They do establish that one of the heads of the school heals Yu-Gi-Oh's eye, so he's not just one-eyed for the rest of the series. He does get his eye back, but he becomes, you know, a proper, you know, Alice AI in this moment because he chose to break one of the rules, and that makes him different and a success within the whole project. And it's very interesting, again, because another thing they established later on, and that the taboo index is, for the most part, not something that is really anything to do with the game. It wasn't programmed to be in the game, the taboo index. That was made by the AIs within the game. That there is a kind of moral, I suppose, imperative is kind of more or less what it is, that they're not meant to hurt each other, that the general just rules of living with other humans apply to all of the Fluchtlights in this world. But the idea of it being this kind of book of rules that they have to follow is all because of, like, Quinella, effectively, and her attempts to gain power and keep that power within a group of nobles and stuff like that. And it's the fact that this book of the taboo index is so spread out across the world is all because of her, and that's where that comes from. That it's not just this case of, like, they're all like, they all have to follow these rules. It's just that they feel, because it's been so entrenched for the last few hundred years, that they have to follow these rules, when in fact it is just this idea of, like, no, yeah, there's a seal on your eye related to it, but if you break that seal, you can break the rules if you so wish. Now, I'm not sure if Quinella is behind the seal on the eye thing, or that's something else, but I thought that was just a really unique way with that seal to kind of show Yu-Gi-Oh's kind of progress as an AI, basically. Yeah, that's that. And I suppose getting into the second half of the story, it's effectively they're in prison. We immediately established they're in prison. They make an escape attempt, which is basically that they use the fact that they're chained up with these chains, they don't have anything to break the chains with, but then Kirito realizes that, wait, these chains, they're both, the ones for Yu-Gi-Oh, the ones for me, they both have the same, like, level. So if we really grind these chains against each other, we can basically free ourselves that way. So they quickly get out. It's very fast paced to get through the content. And on the way out, they basically encounter the newest Integrity Knight. So Alice's Integrity Knight number 30. They encounter Integrity Knight number 31, and they have a fight with him. So it's an Integrity Knight who's super powerful, knows all of these system commands, has these amazing weapons, against Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh, both with broken chains. The fight ends up being quite somewhat even, in that they prove themselves very worthy against opponents you'd think that they shouldn't be able to defeat. But they are going down in this fight. Both of them get injured during the fight. And the only thing that really saves them is that Yu-Gi-Oh remembers, like, oh, you just said your name is this. Does that mean that you're this person? And he basically explains that, like, oh, if you're the newest Integrity Knight, that means you won the last tournament. With the tournament, of course, being the way that Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh initially planned to get into, like, the central city and meet with Alice. So the person who last won that tournament, that's you, isn't it? And they say his full name, whereas he'd before only introduced himself by his first name. And this, like, stops him cold. He's like, wait, what? I'm from this place? I won a tournament here? Because he had talked about how, you know, like, I'd just been, like, transported here as an Integrity Knight a month ago. As if just, like, he came into being as an Integrity Knight and didn't have any history before. And as they do this, they basically, this kind of breaks him kind of mentally in a way. He begins to remember all of this stuff, and suddenly these, like, warning signs go off, this beam of light goes into his head, and Kirito and, like, Yu-Gi-Oh are forced to step back from him. And effectively, it's just this moment of, like, the idea is almost that, like, he's being reprogrammed back to, like, not remember what they've just said to him. The result is that they have to flee away from this situation, and this is where they end up meeting up with Cardinal. It's also it's a really minor reveal, but I think what it's meant to be is that the reason they were able to find their way to Cardinal is because the familiar thing from Volume 10, which just wasn't talked about, I think is meant to be one of Cardinal's familiar, that she has been tracking them a lot of this time and has ultimately been leading them up to this point. Because obviously the familiar had been basically subtly manipulating Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh! So that they would always get through and continue with their quest and eventually make it to her. So that, I think that was what that reveal was meant to be, because like Kirito says that like they go into this maze to get to the Cardinal, and he knows what way to go because he follows the direction that his hair is being tugged in, but they never established that anything is like tugging his hair. And I think it's meant to be the familiar, which is this tiny thing that was talked about in Volume 10. But yeah, so the result is that they have a conversation with Cardinal. Yu-Gi-Oh goes to take a bath and recover from his injuries, and she uses this as an opportunity to talk to Kirito, who she refers to as Kirito the Unregistered, and they have like a conversation where they just really openly, because Yu-Gi-Oh's not around, talk about the fact that, you know, Kirito's in a game, they're in a virtual game, because obviously, of course, the inhabitants don't know that they're just AIs in a game and in a simulation, basically. And this is where all the reveals come out about the Quinella, basically, and there being more here than kind of meets the eye. And you know, it's just the sense of just that they're in this kind of secret area that is like under the tower. It's like the great library that the Cardinal has kind of you know, possession over. But even though she should be like one of the most powerful entities within the world, she only has power within this great library and is limited outside of it because of how powerful Quinella is. And it's just, you know, establishing that they don't have their swords yet, and they're close, but you know, they still have a ways to go. And that's where we ended off. It's a very kind of sudden ending, but it's a nice way to end it because you have all of this extra context because of the story about Quinella you were just told. So overall, I'd say, you know, slightly weaker than the previous two volumes, but still very, very interesting. It's just overall Alicization, I think, is very well written, because it's kind of like the complete opposite of like the initial Aincrad arc of Sword Art Online, which was just skipping over everything to get to the big points, whereas this feels like it's like this big story. It's really well planned out, and it's still fast paced. It's still keeping things going on very quickly, but it's covering all of the ground that you need to. They're filling you in with the information when you need it, and I think that is well done. So yeah, that's my review for Sword Art Online Volume 11, just recently released in English. I don't think 12 is out until December, but I will review that when it comes out. So yeah, that's been the review. Thanks for watching, and bye.